represents the reality on the ground. And going forward, is there a way, and there's a chart or a very small part where the finance minister has been suggesting, and for people who understand financial regulation, the way forward with dealing with the central bank, do we need to separate the role of governor from the person who chairs the board of the Bank of Ghana? Do we need to reconsider the financial management tools we have had on the place? Is our financial regulation structure in and of itself defective? The finance minister has been speaking, and we'll subject it to the needed analysis here on Upfront. I'll be starting in studio. You're welcome, sir, once again.
Thank you very much.
Now, you've seen the statement, right?
Yeah.
What was your initial reaction from those of you who understand finance and how management of this kind happened? There was a lot of uproar when we heard 60 billion loss at the BoG. There was a lot of uproar when we heard the BoG was also building what's supposed to be a new headquarters, a very gargantuan with a lot of money being involved in that expedition. Now, the finance minister says there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we should support the building of this structure in the first place. Yeah. And that it started well before all the difficulties that the BoG had came into place. How do you describe the release of the statement, the time it was released, and in a nutshell, what signal did it send to you?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, and you gave the apt description to it by describing it as a Nicodemus statement, which it was. And I don't think the finance minister really speaks Nicodemously. When he speaks very loud. But I'm really wondering why the tone of this statement has been very low. For me, when I read it, it was a cocktail and a mixture of embarrassment and anger. I thought it was an insult to professionals, it was an insult to Ghanaians, and it was an insult to anyone who has anything or appreciation of finance.
No, okay, so we'll come to the finance bit quite soon. So if you see on your screen now, now if you do get the point, the man argued that the central bank's assets in Ghana, it has grown significantly from 53 billion in 2016 to 126 billion by the end of 2022. And a percentage which is over 138%. Now, on the face of it, my question is whether or not this change, which might be factual, whether it takes into consideration the very difficulties, or if you move it away from just being nominal figures, can we put it in the perspective of what has happened in the banking sector, including the liability side of the Bank of Ghana's balance sheet, in all of this?
Well, Ray, we are looking at, if we look at it in absolute terms, we bring in percentages here and look at the range within which it tells you the kind of masking, right, or economic masking that has come to play here. Why 2016 to 2022? But we had a significant event, which is the IMF bailout. How is that factored in here? So can we have a breakdown of all of that, factoring in or taking cognizance of the IMF bailout and what changes that has brought? But you cannot just have an external bailout come in, you lump things around, and then you come out with absolute percentages to say that from 2016 to 2022, we've had asset increase. Right.
No, I'm getting to your point, but I mean, many will say that if the man is stating facts, be it nominal figures or so, there's some good news to.
So, but how do you account for IMF bailout? Remember,
but isn't not when the
remember we had remember with the central bank's balance sheets was bleeding before we had the bailout. Our reserves were depleted, right? It took the bailout to inject some sanity into the economy, and that's what is being reflected here. So can they account for the period of the bailout?
Does this take
right? Minus that, what do we have in terms of growth of assets? That's when we can begin to have a tangible and real conversation.
I get your point. Does this take into consideration the liability side of the BoG's assets?
Well, that's for them to break down, because he's just giving us that this is what it is in assets from 2016 to 2022. So without a breakdown of that, and that tells you the kind of communication we're bringing in here and the masking that is already beginning to happen. But I'm wondering why this statement at this time?
Because, you see, the title of the statement is that standing strong with the Bank of Ghana.
Yes.
Citizens, so ordinary citizens of this country ought to some extent.
No, but Ray, there's something fundamental no one is pointing out to the finance minister and the central bank governor. For me, I just thought that maybe the central bank governor, is eating humble pie. But for the minister to join, right, in the fray of undermining losses on a bank's balance sheet is worrying. But more so, more so when the very instrument the bank or the central bank uses for its monetary policy is moral suasion. How do you use moral suasion and undermine losses on a bank's balance sheet.
Now, I get your point. Now, I need to get some clarity on this particular matter too, because there is a lot more that's actually happening in this space, and I should be bringing in a man who's managed the finance ministry before. Mr. Terkper, if you can join us with your thoughts on this one, I would like to find out from you, because you've been there before. The indication we've gotten is that perhaps we are being too hard on the Bank of Ghana. Listen, this is a bank that's been doing pretty well until the recent, if you like, shocks pushed it out of gear. And if it says it posted a lot of the great record that the finance minister is putting out there, you would admit that this is good news, isn't it? Well, if Seth Terkper joined us.
Yes, I'm joining you.
Yes,
can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. The question I was asking is, at the outset, okay. So I was expecting a response, so I wasn't hearing from you.
Yeah, I think I was speaking, but I was muted. So
forgive me. All right, I get you. Yeah.
I think, as the prof said, it gives you a picture of the magnitude of the fall, how deep Ghana had to fall. Remember that this is the first time we have heard about the government, performing well. We were supposed to be doing fiscal consolidation. All of this has fizzled. So if this is the magnitude of reserves that Bank of Ghana built, it begs the question, as Prof is saying, what happened? I heard you mention shocks. Don't forget that we had 6 billion, and I keep repeating, US dollars injection into the economy, to resolve that shock. If you multiply that by 10, that's 60 billion. And you can compare it with the 70 billion or so that GRA brings in annually. So, and if the economy was really growing, how come growth has lacking? How come we cannot pay our debt if we were performing this well? So I think, the statement, in a sense, is rather revealing to Ghanaians how deep and fast, the fall has become. You mentioned nominal figures, right? You mentioned nominal figures, yes. But then, by what percentage did the GDP grow? GDP, which is heading towards 800 million. What was it in 2016? And what were the inputs? Did it not come from 3 oil fields? Did it not come from buffers? Did it not come from the inflows? Did it not come from, the various bonds that we issued? And yes, still, today, I mean, we've been visited on the debt and others, but if you go to the reserves, what constitutes the petroleum reserves, they are depleted. We all know that the stabilization fund flow is down to 100 million and you won't see anything in it. This is a stabilization fund that was used to take off nearly to test of His Excellency President Kufuor's, bonds. So I think that without due respect, we should, this is not a time, to be telling us, how well Bank of Ghana was doing, how well we are doing. Was the essence of Bank of Ghana doing well to finance the entire deficit for the Ministry of Finance? I think that we should look at, that seriously. That, yes, if we can exonerate the Minister of Finance, can exonerate the Bank of Ghana. As we said, I have said already, as you published, that much of the problem we have is fiscal. And what we are being told is confirmation. After all, we know, that Bank of Ghana finance, the government to the extent of, some 40 billion or so. Mm-hmm. We also know that Bank of Ghana, during the crisis, the 6 billion I mentioned, includes 1.7 billion to support the budget. And we know that usually when the IMF, in particular, gives loans and resources to the country, it goes to the Bank of Ghana to strengthen its forex buffers, which is the reason why it's the bank that usually pays for those loans. How come part of the ECF was used for budget support? How come the entire 1 billion, we went to the IMF board to ask for a waiver to use it to support, the budget? How come part of the SDR, went into supporting the budget? So I think we are getting close to this statement tells you the real problem that we have. And if the economy were performing, how come we are taking money from pensioners, retirees who have saved it? And then we call that a success, something to be proud of. I'm afraid that I can't agree with that.
But
So it gives us the opportunity rather to look at how gigantic, the fall has been, how deep and fast, it has been.
Is it not possible to state the positives and equally state the difficulties, as government puts it, and mostly called external pressures that this economy has suffered, so that it is balanced out in a way that we do not bastardize the central bank the way it has been done in the last couple of weeks? When it became obvious there was some 60 billion loss, when it became obvious there was some difficulty with the central bank having to get a new head office. Is it not fair that a finance minister who has a fuller picture of the reality on the ground is able to put in perspective to the view and understanding of the people of this world, especially those who are not politicians and who are not partisan, so that they can appreciate how good and well the central bank has been run, perhaps until recently?
Debates will be very healthy, right? If we are told the role of the Ministry of Finance in bringing down the central bank, the successful Ministry of Finance, the successful central bank, because that is the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter is that the central bank balance sheet, is at the moment not in good shape. The reserves which the central bank superintends. Remember when we talk about assets of the central bank, of course it holds some of them on behalf of the government and on behalf of the people of Ghana. And part of those, almost all of those resources, particularly the petroleum ones, but for the uproar that came, the Heritage Fund would have been depleted. It's the only one which, hasn't been touched because of the opposition when it was meant to. So, yes, we do acknowledge. And we do acknowledge that at various points in time, the Bank of Ghana was controlling interest rates. It was trending downwards. How come it turned around and all of a sudden, jumped from, I think, somewhere closer to the single digit as they were aiming, all the way, to 40, 50%? Raymond, that's a question. For me, that's a relevant question. How come, the reserves, that strong reserves, and what's the cause of those reserves being depleted, and where did they go? Such that, in the recent fund statement, we came down to 1.3 months of import cover. So I'm saying that, yes, we can acknowledge what the central bank has done. And now remember when the central bank started increasing interest rates, obviously, to cure the deficit financing that had been done, I supported a move. Many people did not agree with me, but there was no alternative left to the central bank than to use the instruments for which it is established, to try and stabilize the economy. So we do acknowledge all those positives. No one is running away from, some positives which the central bank has chalked. The central bank's initiatives on boosting our gold reserves, and various other, those are well known. The central bank's contribution, in terms of, deepening the use of electronic means of payment, through the loans and things which have come from previous administration and which implementation is going. Those are well known. So I don't think that is in question. But we are talking about the speed with which all those successes came to nil, the speed with which, the reserves were depleted, and the speed with which, if you want to believe it, we came to a point where we had to, print, money, deficit financing. That is the crux of the matter. And I would have wished that the statement addressed also, the role, that fiscal agents and others also played, in bringing the Bank of Ghana to that sad situation. That is the point I'm trying to, to make.
I'll get to that question, But there's a point, though. The picture painted there is a very performing Bank of Ghana. But in the IMF stated MEFP, it says the central bank's balance has been impaired and must be rebuilt.
Yes, which wasn't taken cognizance of in the statement.
Yes.
A bit disingenuous there.
So I'm just wondering, whose words do we take? The finance minister or the IMF's MEFP?
No, but are you forgetting that the IMF has got a big watchman in the central bank as we speak now? They've got a balance sheet expert who sits in there. So there's no way the IMF would come out, lenders' money come out and speak negatively to the issue. But they had to tell us the impairment of what was happening. But Ray, you look at all of this amidst all of the issues happening. We're talking about the central bank's independence and all of that, and the minister did emphasize that. But what's happening today? He's usurping, getting into the way of the central bank to back it. Where is his independence now? A finance minister jumped to the defense of an independent central bank to say this is what it is, and these are the figures.
But if these are facts, why should it? What should hold him back from actually stating that to the
activities of the bank, the monetary policy, interest rate should speak for itself. Today, the very model that we use, right, as a measure of tools for inflation and the like. Okay. If we plot our activities into the Taylor rule, which is a model for the forecast, where will we be today as a central bank? That is the clearer picture we should be talking about, right? Not bundling issues of 2016 to 2022 without actually disaggregating that and factoring in a bailout that we just recently had. Why is it that such statements were not coming out in the run-up to the bailout? You see, but there's a certain level of communication that this government keep pushing down the throats of Ghanaians, well-meaning Ghanaians, which is that they think they are smart and they can get away with everything, right? You go to an IMF, you negotiate, you get it, so we had a record time in securing an IMF bailout, and we should applaud them for it.
Statement of fact, isn't it?
Well, and what has a record time got to do? Have you ever had an IMF deal that's not gone through?
But if it's done on time, it means that the people believe in our ability to bounce back the way we ought to bounce back.
No, come on. But the IMF itself, in their interest that a deal goes through as fast as it goes. What are we talking about, Ray?
So you don't think that that's something that we should?
No, but how is that an achievement? No, how is that an achievement? You go to the bank for a loan, and the loan officer is friendly to you enough to issue the loan, and that's an achievement.
It's not a testament to your credit worthiness.
Oh, yet you can go back to the financial market or the capital market. Yeah. Right? So it's a favor that has been done us, and I think that it's about time. We should have bowed our heads in shame for a government that has, beat its chest to say that I'm never going to go to the IMF. They said it on the floor of Parliament, they said it everywhere, yet they went back and they're telling us this. And I don't think the media should be encouraging them to be doing these things. Now, right? We need to put their feet to the fire to speak. Now you're talking about the building, which because the point is, at the time they were posting, they were posting losses. Right? Look at the timeline for the completion of the building. Have they ring-fenced the money for the building? Where's the money coming from? Not from the bank, or it's coming from the finance ministry?
No, it's actually from the central bank.
Yeah, so that has been ring-fenced.
Well, they said they
because you are reporting losses.
Yes, they had.
You report losses and you ring-fence money for a modern building.
Mindful of the security and other implications of not having that kind of building.
Well, so what compromises do they have in their current building? They've housed. No, what compromises?
For example.
No, none of this is against the building. We're just talking about timing issue here. Okay. So what is it?
Is it not fair that the time they started this building in 2018, the very difficulties that we are talking about today was not present, was not foreseeable?
No, but they were talking COVID-19 at the time. They were talking Russia and Ukraine at the time. Yeah. Weren't they? These were all up, ripe in the air. So if they were talking all of these things, was that the right time to prioritize a new building? When they make their own statements, the central bank governor, they state that the idea, or mooting the idea to have had this building started in the 90s. And if it starts in the 90s, governors have come and gone. And when I read the statement, one of the most interesting bits, which I thought again was insulting to well-meaning Ghanaians, is that they said, okay, well, this is akin to Dr. Agame's time. Goodness me, how do you go cherry pick up an old governor up, dust him, and compare to a certain governor? But Ray, another fundamental issue.
Right. G.K. Agama's time had the same scenario.
Yeah, but what's the justification here? What is it? Were there haircuts in Agama's time? Were they? How many times did Agama go to the capital markets? They ran out of credits on so they should bring out the figures and we can juxtapose that, make a clear comparison. to actually come out with this. But doing that, I think that is insulting to the legacy of Acquah. They should just deal with what the issues are and speak to them rather than these needless comparison of cherry-picking Germany, UK, and losses that are not having an apple and orange comparison as to what these economies are and what we also have. So I think that it's more of a PR gimmick. When I read the statement, it looks like one written by a PR professional and imbued with the biblical quotes of the finance minister.
But in all fairness, there's nothing wrong with PR, right? I mean, clearly.
But if the PR...
Institutions engage
but if the PR is very basic, bland, vanilla, and insulting, there's something wrong with it.
I would like you to explain to me the insulting part, but let me bring it, Mr. Terkper, on this point about underpinning this thought is the thinking among some people. So what is, to your mind, the role of the finance ministry in getting the Bank of Ghana to the corner it finds itself, that a defense is warranted at this time?
I think the governor, one, is superfluous because the governor has already issued a statement restating many of these issues, if you understand. Of course, it's a role, of the Minister for Finance, who is in charge of the macroeconomy, to also talk about, monetary issues, which is part of the issue. And let me say that, at the point when the city was depreciating fast in 2013, yes, if you remember, I conducted a media brief to outline, fiscal and other measures that were being taken, including we were going to program cocoa flows into the economy, which came across as defending, the central bank. So one is not faulting the Minister for Finance for that, but we're talking about, looking at the situation in which the country is today. Raymond, let me make a couple of points. You spoke about the MEF. That's the Memorandum of Economic and Financial Performance.
Yes,
the Memorandum and Economic, yes, the MEFP, right? And the letter of intent, which is signed by the governor and the Minister for Finance, go together. So that is a government input into the IMF program. So the minister, it's not an IMF, input. IMF actually, it tells you, those two documents tell you the perspective of government, as part of the negotiations. And so if there are concessions and things that are being made, and the truth is coming out of it today, we should see, a government that is now telling us some of the key issues that were confronting, the economy. The other point is, I remember, again, that I come to the point. Remember that for us to achieve domestic debt exchange success, the Bank of Ghana had to, virtually write off, the debts that government owed to it. Some of those debts are not new. Yes, of course. But that itself is going to have a long-lasting effect on the central bank because it means that the borrowing that the Bank of Ghana did, even if it's within the 5%, on which government has to pay interest, right? Because those were funds for the are not going to be there. And that means that it means the recovery of the central bank itself, much bigger. And as Prof mentioned, remember we were winning ourselves of the, the IMF, only for us to succumb and to come to all of this. And so what is this boldness that we're talking about? Prof already mentioned, our tendency to compare ourselves, to other central banks. Remember, just before we could not pay our debt, and that is the truth we must face. We are not able to pay our debt. And that's why we have to get here. Just before we got, to that point, we were making the same comparisons and saying, after all, the debt of Japan, the debt of UK, US is above 100%. So what's wrong with it? You can compare now where we are with the stability of those countries, some of whose debt are still above 100%, and are able to continue to go to the bond market and others and issue. That's the difference. The difference is
when
that
you hear, for example,
the difference is that we have come to rely almost exclusively now on only T-bills, and loans from the multilateral and others to finance our budget. That is the crucial difference. So we must cut our coat according to, or as a monkeys play by sizes, and we should. Because even when it comes to to Africa, we should be looking to things which Botswana and others are doing, which is some of which are in the very, buffers that were built, which are depleted today, as I said.
I get you, but I need to press you further on this point. The argument is that, listen, regardless of the negative equity that central bank is having today, they still met their policy objectives. In fact, they moved on to actually give you some supplementary evidence to support the fact that all is not lost, and this central bank is more likely to recover earlier than many people thought would be the case.
Nobody's wishing the central bank ill, right? In the interest of disclosure, I sat on the central bank board for 3.5 years, close to 4 years, as a deputy minister. And I know the mettle, of, some of the staff who are there. In fact, at the time, the current governor was head of research before he left, the country, and I know them. I don't want to go personal, but I know, the quality, of technocrats that are there, many of them with their PhDs, and, so that is not the point that we are making.
So are we being unfair to Governor Addison then?
The point I'm making is the extent to which, how come the Ministry of Finance itself should move? That's a question. From zero financing, which was silent in 2016. The statement is silent on that.
But that cannot be blamed on Governor Addison. The question I'm asking is, have we then been unfair to Governor Addison then?
Wait, do you want me to come in here?
I just made a point. A point that nobody is taking any success away from Governor Addison. And if anything, the tea that we have, and I made a point that they have issued a elaborate statement, which some of us keep saying, should draw attention to the extent to which the fiscal has come to destroy the bank.
Okay.
That is the point I'm making.
Which fiscal policy, which is driven by the finance ministry, yes.
The only point, the main point where I have always been open and have said was that at a point when the central bank was financing the deficit, which was approved by Parliament through an appropriation act, when they were called upon, they should have gone to Parliament on the premise that they are going not on somebody undermining the independence of the bank, but being on the point of transparency and accountability to the people, to the people's representative.
You being finance minister, was it possible ever for the governor of the Bank of Ghana to say to the face of the finance minister, listen, I won't let you push me into this corner. I have a lot of independence in the very act that establishes my office, and I'm not going to go in this direction. Was it possible for the central bank to do so?
You think if it wasn't possible, we could have achieved zero financing? We also had an IMF program, if you remember. If it wasn't possible for remember, the zero financing comes out of a memorandum that is signed between the Minister of Finance and the central bank, which ideally should be, and I keep stating that it should be 5% is the most, reasonable thing to do, especially when you get into a downturn. Right. So if we achieve that, it tells you that you were also facing a central bank that wasn't willing to, and the term fiscal dominance was there. When we're talking about all of this, go to the 2023 IMF program, you see it. Sorry, the 2015 IMF program. Fiscal dominance was there. And there was concern. There was concern that, we were borrowing significantly, particularly for single spine and the rest, which is why we had to negotiate with labor. Those are the practical things. We had to reduce expenditure. We are refusing to reduce expenditure. So there were practical things that were done to achieve that. Of course, you could have gone to the central bank and asked for savings to pay contractors. We did ESLA in order that we can pay contractors and the rest. And that's imposition of tax, which is fiscal. So that is the difference.
Perhaps on a decision that was not forced down the throat of the central bank, having to build a new headquarters. You've been minister before. You've said on that central bank's what they call the board in times past. Was it a poor decision in 2018? Continue that project up to this time. Is it still a poor decision to continue the building of that particular edifice as new headquarters of the central bank?
Look, the issue of central bank space has always been, there. A lot of the central bank staff are currently in the city building, which was taken over from Agri Development Bank. So the city house, a lot of central bank staff who are there. currently. You're right. The point being made, as Prof mentioned, right? If there is a justification for it, the point being made is just as on the fiscal side, we suspended, the largest portion of the e-schools because crude oil prices and things had fallen on the fiscal side. The point that's been made is that in a period of austerity, let us be seen not to be extravagant. And that is putting aside the issues that are coming up as to who the contractor is, as to whether processes were followed or not. The key point is that at the point when the bank was lending to government and was going down, should it have occurred, to the bank that it is time, to probably, limit, or suspend some of these initiatives, right? Especially
even if it's for modernizing the operations of the central bank, even if this institution is supposed to help modernize the operations of perhaps our central bank.
Look, let me give you an example. When the news came up, right, of course it became partisan, that the central bank had built a hospital, first class. I don't think Ghanaians went out to criticize the central bank. It was seen as part of corporate social responsibility because after all, in some countries, when the central banks makes profits, the bulk of it is taken to the Ministry of Finance, right? But you didn't see so much waste in that profit. So that tells you that the wherewithal with which the central bank can do things, like another one is the conference center, which is named after, the late vice president, the CD conference center, at Lagos, and many other projects which the central bank has supported. Even at the time when the balance sheet was healthy. And I think that we should have that balanced view, that when the central bank makes profits and it thinks that its budget is strong, it embarked on projects, community projects which served, I know about, schools, primary schools and others which were constructed by this, board of the central bank and, previous ones. But many people did not even hear about many of this because the central bank was not in trouble. So I think that we should get that perspective clear. All that Ghanaians are saying is that it is hard time, everybody is sacrificing, and it's at about time, the central bank, probably stalled on that. Of course, there were other issues that are being raised. I'm not justifying, those issues. So I'm only explaining. Okay. There were issues that were raised with respect to cost, with respect to, the contract, who is better, and all that. Those are issues which came after, the concern that this is not a time when you are making losses to embark on that.
There are questions being raised about the propriety or the lack thereof of the current structure of financial regulation in the country. I'll come to you. Even the finance minister of the Republic of Ghana believes there's a need for a debate on whether or not the current regulatory structure ought to be maintained. Who is in charge at the Bank of Ghana? The continual role of a chairman and also governor at the Bank of Ghana equally ought to be reviewed. Those are some of the proposals coming from the finance minister. Those are things I'll be asking you for some thoughts in a matter of minutes from now. But let me come into studio. We've been talking about this role and what they can do, policy direction. I mean, Dr. Khalid, in a sum, some believe that going forward, the Bank of Ghana should be bold and insist that there are things we cannot do no matter what, where the pressure is coming from.
All right, I think a lot is already ongoing. And from where I sit and look at the model of the central bank in terms of its governance structure, most often than not, we tend to have what I term a dangerous hybrid. And by a dangerous hybrid, we tend to have a combination of the UK-centric perspective and the US-centric perspective. And we combine them, we localize it, and it turns out not to be what it is in the winner for all kind of democracy.
Okay.
Then, for instance, let's go back to the central bank's board. You've got a computer here. You could Google it up and see board members. Mm-hmm. I'm not doubting the competence of anyone, but you probably want to see expertise and correlation to the basic function and fundamental role of a central bank. Right. Again, something fundamentally, as I browse through that coming, again, I don't have anything personal to do with anybody, but in going through, I saw that there was a former in-house counsel who now sits on the central bank's board as a non-exec. from a corporate governance perspective, I don't know how the bank justifies and explains this, but with a bank that superintends over corporate governance or other financial institutions or significantly financial institutions, it ought to be explaining this position and for us to have a full appreciation to understand these things. Because what you practice or what you preach is what you should be practicing, because they have a big role to play. Mind you, in the last cleanup we had in the banking failure, corporate governance was at the fulcrum of it, and it played an integral role. So looking at this is very important. But you look at the appointments to the board of the central bank. We can come to the monetary policy later. We look at the board itself, in and of itself, where you have majority of its members appointed by the president. You have a representation from the finance ministry. Most often than not, you have deputy finance ministers sitting there and all of that. Then you have the governor who chairs. Right, so you see the kind of US centricism happening here. But in the US, what happens is that the chair does not sit or chair the Fed for, it has a stipulated duration within which they can chair for, and rotates within state central banks or federal reserves. You see where it comes from. And in the UK, you would find that these members are appointed by the Crown. Yeah. And not, so you see the difference, and how when we come, we have a sort of like lethal cocktail that tend to sort of not give us the broader and picture of a real governance structure that we need to have for our central banks, and that derails the kind of independence we are talking about here.
Now, I get your point. I was just bringing other people who have actually been having thoughts on the central bank's management and the system that ought to change. And I'm sure if Dr. John Baden joins us in this conversation, we sure will be having some thoughts from him as well. But I'm coming to you, Mr. Terkper. What should we do, mindful of the current happenings and the most recent developments at the central bank, with how it is regulated, how it is operated, and how it is currently structured?
The issues coming out are, one, legal. For example, to what extent should the central bank, finance the budget? It's in law. 5% of previous year revenue. So that's a legal issue. If we have reason to raise or lower it, it is good economics, it's good accounting, and it makes the Ministry of Finance sit up, and gets resources to manage the economy. Of course, there's exceptional provision in situations like COVID, where, the declaration can be made by the governor and some more could be given. The issue is whether such a rule, emergency, should remain with cabinets or with, the governor. That is one issue more than the legality. I've already mentioned, I don't want to belabor the point, that we should also, after many years of operation, look at independence versus accountability. Remember, it's not following from the three arms of state itself, and the dispensation given to the Media Commission. This is not the only point at which we are talking about independence of the Supreme Court, independence of the legislature, against what is perceived to be a powerful executive. So if you draw the analogy against what is perceived to be, a powerful Ministry of Finance that can make, the central bank succumb. And this is where we are saying the solution, often, as in the US, right, is for the governor to go to the people's representatives, committees, not the whole house. The committees, at least, who will then report to the whole house for the reports to be. So we should separate accountability. Maybe it's time to examine whether we want to separate accountability from independence. Remember, GRA has operational independence. It's of finance, there's only, the policy part. GRA has unfettered operational independence. And the Minister of Finance cannot interfere, with that function. But when it comes to accountability, the GRA commissioner is accountable to Parliament as part of the budget that is prepared, the revenue side of the budget, and the performance. And the input, for that, comes, comes from GRA, whose commissioner, like the governor, cannot be the one moving legislation and motions and other things, in Parliament. There's a bigger issue also.
Mr. Terkper, I just know that you come back to this point, but I need to bring it because I've been keeping on hold for a while now. Dr. John Baden, and he's so critical to this conversation because This is a man who's in times past dragged the central bank to court, insisting that they should do some specific things. He's written consistently and proficiently on how best to run the central bank and the very things they should be focusing on. Dr. Beatty, you're welcome to Upfront.
Thank you.
Now, let me start from this point, though. This conversation is premised on a very wonderful love letter to the people of this republic from the finance minister defending the central bank, mindful of the recent brouhaha over its operations and its conduct as a central bank. Basically, the finance minister has been saying that central bank has been doing its job, recently had some difficulties, but it's likely to recover anytime soon, and we should not be bastardizing that institution. From your experience, is it appropriate, the kind of structure we run today as our central bank?
The kind of what?
Structure we run today as our central bank.
Oh, well, then it's just, so if I understand you correctly, you are trying to ask me if I think that the legal framework in which the central bank operates is optimal or is, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think not. Or even if it is, the central bank is not a compliant institution. Because, it hasn't really fulfilled any of its mandates. So the central bank, as far as I'm concerned, has just not been people-oriented. It's not been law compliant. So that's all I can say. Because the law says that it must provide a stable currency. The law says that it must make sure that there's price stability in the country. But these two major mandates, it has completely failed.
And more recently, because of what has happened, people are beginning to point accusing fingers. The finance ministry believes that this is unfair to the central bank.
Well, what do you expect? It's camaraderie. I'm not surprised. It's rough now that the finance minister will say something to back, the governor or the central banker. But the reality is that we, the people, we don't steal the central bank. You understand? That's the reality. All that I have read the memo or the write-up, but there's nothing but a feel-good, write-up. But the reality is that the central bank has just failed on its mandate. As far as I'm concerned, it hasn't served as well.
Are there repercussions for failing on your mandate as a central bank? Or we just...
Well, that is why I petitioned the Attorney General, and he refused to be. He didn't even acknowledge, which is terrible. That's why I petitioned the Attorney, because somebody must hold them accountable, and who is there to hold them accountable? Nobody. So that is how come we are in this situation. We don't have any structure or any measure or any institution that makes sure that the central bank is in compliance with the law. I also sued. I went, because of that, I sued at the Supreme Court. That also, I didn't really get, the kind of backing that I was looking for.
Is there a lost cause then? Can we fix the central bank?
Well, we the people must wake up and then have a dialogue over a central bank. Central banks are created for a purpose. And whatever, we need to ask ourselves, the purpose for which the central bank was created, is it fulfilling that purpose? If it's not, then, either we shut it down or, we just do something about it.
I am grateful to you, Dr. John Badin, and he's a law lecturer, and I'm coming in studio for some concluding remarks. First and foremost, with you, sir.
Yeah, Ray, just to follow up from what Dr. Badin said, you'll realize as we talk about independence, the likes of that, and I talked about the lethal cocktail we have. In the US, the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are banks, are national banks, actually, the likes of JP Morgan. The list goes as long as 100 plus. You get it? So in that case, there can be real accountability. So it's about time we actually delink this sort of lethal, what I call the lethal cocktail of UK-centric and US-centric perspective of doing things and try to really localize and see what is fit for purpose for us. But you made a very fundamental point, and I thought that you'd have done same for WEMPA, right? Where you kept saying, should we be calling for the head of Addison? But the politics of the central bank used to stay away from our useless everyday politics. We never involved it. Yeah. But it took the politics of 2015 to bring the central bank into the fray of our national politics. Yeah. By we, the elite who thought that it was good to bring that in to denigrate a certain political party to kick it out, then we started to say WEMPA must go. Dr. Nashru and his able deputies. Yeah. Yes, Dr. Isiama were doing a fantastic job. Why do we have to let them go? Immediately a government came in, they kicked them off. So this is the kind of things that we have, and these are the kind of arrangements we need to have to really have longevity, to have professionalism, to have meritocracy within that. And as my senior comrade Seth Terkper, they are really hardcore technocrats who know their stuff sitting in the central bank. But at the apex, we try to take our politics there to derail their efforts.
But I think we need the number of technocrats that appear in that institution. Yeah. If they are not achieving the goal, I mean, merely having competent people is a means to an end. Yeah. The end is ensuring the development of this country and delivering on your specific mandate enshrined in the Constitution.
Exactly. So by giving it that independence, by giving it that independence, central banks will stop underwriting governments. Or when they are to underwrite governments, they will do that with prudence.
Even when they feel that they have some allegiance or so to the government of the day.
Well, we're talking independence, so where lies allegiance? It should be about the people of Ghana, their mandate. And the core duty of a central bank should be a core duty of a central bank is not to underwrite a government, or a government that's gone recklessly or gone rogue on the capital markets, on a borrowing spree without factoring in the real appreciation and fundamentals of the economy. And today it's all come back at us.
Now, the minister who is in charge of finance, Mr. Terkper, has proposals. He's asking for a debate. Perhaps our conversation is supposed to be heading in that direction of that debate. But is there an end in sight where we have a proper central bank delivering the goals it's supposed to deliver so that the people feel the benefits of having that institution in place tangibly?
The central bank is part of the economy, and let me emphasize. And let me also emphasize that, the current governors of the central bank are technocrats in their own right. I think that the question, and then let me restate the point by way of summary, that the Constitution, as well as the Bank of Ghana laws, is not just one law. There are others we deal with other aspects of operations. Has significant provisions. For example, to what extent should the central bank finance governments in normal times when there are, small hitches here and there? To what extent should the central bank come in when, there is when the economy takes a major hit, like COVID, like the global financial crisis? Remember that when the global financial crisis came and later COVID, central banks played a key role. The central bank in the US, that's what we call the quantitative easing, the term that has come. But, securities. If the central bank's reserves had not been depleted, the central bank will be buying some of the securities, the bonds, which are due to pensioners and the rest. That is, if the hit that the economy is taking is a true and genuine one, but we have depleted those reserves, the reserves within the central bank. And when the Fed sold back those securities, on the stock exchange, much of the resources went to the US Treasury, which is the reason why they didn't have to go through those rounds when COVID hit, the buffer from the profits that were made. So the central bank has a very key role to play. And let me also touch on another point. Well, I personally, as I said, the central bank is full of technocrats. And maybe after a period of, say, 3, 4 or so years, we shouldn't have any reservations, if former technocrats who are served on the central bank, can come and be members of the central bank board. After all, they will be sharing, their, enormous, experience. So, now we have been having hybrids, and a review of the Constitution has been called. Remember that our parliament itself is a mixture of the pure executive, where ministers are not members of parliament. That's the US presidential. And then the Westminster, which we practice, and we practice both, where, the entire cabinet and ministers are, MPs. We have a situation where 50% must come from parliament. Well, is this a good model, or not? So one is so much against compromises. That's what the points that we are making, in having, former, staff and things. So in fact, I don't see any reason why a former governor, for example, could not at any point in time, once his policy role and everything has gone, some years, as is usually the case, even in corporate. Otherwise, we'll be losing, of course, they can be appointed advisors to the president, and the rest. So the issue confronting here with the statement is that one is not questioning, the performance of central banks in the history of this country. But I think what is missing in the statement is a role. And I think which should have been addressed. Is one, the contribution which Ghanaians have made to an expanding economy, which by using nominal figures, for the performance of the central bank reserves, leaves out. This is why inflation is measured in real terms, for example, whatever you'll be doing injustice, leaves out the fact that Ghanaians had invested in 3 oil fields before the onset of the current administration. The financial and other sectors were growing, way back from, His Excellency Kufuor's era and through that Mills Mahama.
Okay.
So to take the combination of all of this and attribute it, to one bank, one central bank, I think it's not. And then finally, it leaves out, the role which the Ministry of Finance played, the role of fiscal in the current state, of, the central bank. And particularly the fact that the central bank has had, apart from financing the deficit to the tune of 1.7 billion, and then further coming to finance it again, almost the entire deficit, apart from this financing, remember the central bank balance is also depleted by the fact that it will be depleted because it came after, that statement will be depleted by the fact that it is forgiving debt which government owes it.
I think you should forgive me because my time is up. And I think that we should have more conversations like this in the future. Many thanks to Mr. Terkper, Dr. John Baden, and Dr. Sharif Khalid. I really have to go now. Forgive me. We should do more before you leave to London. Many thanks to you also for joining tonight's episode of Upfront.